Hey, Inner Wisdom Society, it's Dave, and it is time for our October kind of overall talk. This month's topic is polarity and duality. First, I'd like to welcome everybody who's just joined since in the last month or so. So, if you have a chance and you're in the Facebook group, go ahead and catch up on check out the videos from September. If you want to check out, the topic was learning to let go. And what you'll kind of see as we build along is that as we lay all the topics out, let go is pretty important because everyone kind of has an idea of some things they need to let go of, or people's expectations or peer pressure that unduly influences them and makes them kind of veers them off their path of their true authentic self. But you'll see I'll lay out some of these principles, and then as we go through the months, there'll kind of be callbacks to it that help us go kind of the next level on other topics. You'll see in December when we talk about like what is it that you want out of life, how do you get very clear on what you want out of life. The callback is going to be obviously in order to go after and achieve that, you need to let go of what other people expect of you or whatever you feel the expectations that other people are putting on you. And similarly, this month is actually more difficult, I would say, in the initial principle or discussion, which is polarity and duality. And this idea, I guess I would say the best case, if you only have one takeaway, is think of things like a magnet. A magnet always has two poles, north and south, and it's always both at the same time. It's never one or the other. And so it will go through some specific, topics and discussion around that. But the callback to this will be as we go down later on it. Will be as we get to like what is the secret of life. The secret of life is, at least I know it or I understand it, that this callback is being very important. That you can't chop off. We see on social media posts all the time, right? People try to only post the most positive things in their life and hide all the negative. And in reality, both life is always going to come with both ups and downs, like a wave that always comes every time. And then that's something that's going to be very important as we go out later towards discovering the secret of life. But for now, I think why this topic is super important is because, and I think the October is a good time to do it because October, Halloween's coming. We got a full moon and a blue moon on Halloween. And so I think Halloween is an invitation for people to explore maybe more of their dark side, or at least acknowledge, that by dressing up as whatever they want for Halloween. The pagans and Celtics years ago felt like this was the time, because this would be almost their new year, where they felt like this is a time where the lines between the physical world and the spiritual world were kind of blurred, and you might be able to, actually speak or see relatives or whatever you expect, your spirit guides, guardian angels, and get some wisdom from them as well. So with the idea of exploring the dark side, we'll kind of go into this idea of polarity or duality, where everything has two sides at one time. There's positive and negative. That obviously ties into also karma, because as you can kind of get into some of these topics as we look at from some of the videos, you'll see how from this you can easily get to, okay, karma plays a role in this, because if there's a polarity between self and other, so therefore, as whatever I do to another person, that's going to come back and affect myself, because self and other are always attached, even though we try to sometimes create separation between them. Then you'll see how that becomes very important. So that's kind of the quick overview that we're going to go through today. Actually, this one's specific. Most months always true. This month very specifically. Once you go through all the videos that I've posted or texted and go through them, I would actually go through them a second time, because as you go through them a second time, you'll see things that are kind of talked about in the later videos kind of pop up again in the early ones, or they helps makes a little bit more sense. So I'll kind of briefly go through some of the main themes from some of the videos that we had. If you have any questions, comment below or text me back and let me know how you're thinking about it. It's been super helpful for me to go through this kind of idea, especially as I do tarot card reading or looking at people's astrology charts and reports, because as anytime people see the cards, like, is that a good card or a bad card, right? They want to put it into buckets. Is this a good astrology chart? Is this a bad astrology chart? Your sun sign is in Aries. Is that a good sign or a bad sign? Everyone always wants to divide things into these buckets. In reality, it's both things at the same time. It brings you energy. You can use it for positive ways. You can use it in negative ways. But it's bringing you the specific energy for you to figure out how to use. Just like many tarot cards, like the Empress, we have lots of Venus energy. That's a lot of mothering kind of energy. So that mothering energy could be like true maternal love, or it could be, they're really overbearing, looking over your shoulder, very critical kind of smothering, mothering energy as well at the same time. I think that some of us experience. So I think that that's why those things can occur at the same time, because they can be kind of blurred, right? The mom thinks that they are actually loving you and trying to help you as much as possible, but you may view it as being overbearing, or overreaching, or too much micromanaging. So now let's go through some of the videos. The first video I posted, which is the Alan Watts I Am I Because You Are You, that kind of introduces some of the concept around this, which is, he talks about prickles and goo kind of being the two polar opposites of, people who like to be very precise, or people who like to be vague, and then where they kind of see things differently, but they obviously need each other. I don't think this is the place to get into like lots of political things, because I want everyone to believe whatever they want to believe. But we're getting to an election here in the United States. I know some people are in other countries, and we have in our country two political parties, and they may feel like the other one, they're polar opposites of each other. But if you actually listen to most of the most commercials don't say this is what we believe, or this is what the other party believes. It's a lot of, we think the other party is wrong on X, Y, Z, right? And you listen to the other, it's like, we think the other party is wrong on these three things. So they may use words that sound like, oh, we're for whatever may be, small government, freedoms, whatever the case may be. But what they're really saying is the other party is for way too big a government, restricting your freedoms, whatever the case may be. So you end up kind of having them the same way. So that's why this first video, Prickles and Goo, kind of gets the idea of, we may view it as polar opposites, meaning absolutely things that can't agree or can't see eye to eye. It's the same thing on kind of compatibility. So as I do astrology signs, there's signs that are compatible and signs that are not compatible. And in some relationship discussions or readings, people say, oh, are our signs compatible or not compatible? And just because they're deemed quote unquote not compatible doesn't mean that you should not have a relationship with that person. What it means is you see the world in a totally different way than they see the world. Therefore, it's going to be natural that you may not have some agreements on things, because you may not view it. And usually in a relationship, what ends up happening is one person sees one thing as a small thing, insignificant. The other person sees it as a very big deal. Can you not see this as a really big deal? And it's because they view things on a different lens. Like, I don't understand why they're so angry. That was just such a small, insignificant thing. And the other person says, that was such a huge, telling thing that happened. I have no idea why you think it's such a small deal, and just a small deal, and kind of sweep it under the rug, right? And it's because they just fundamentally view the world in a different way. And it doesn't mean that those two are incompatible or can't have a relationship. It just acknowledges that they see the world in fundamentally different ways. So they're naturally going to have more communication to try to help find the middle ground, or see where they can meet or have conversations with each other, so that they don't have the misunderstandings just based on the fundamentals that they see the world in a different way. Other things Alan Watts kind of talks about in that video is, we kind of think of these things as being separate or different, but in fact they're always connected, like the front or back of you, heads and tails of a coin, wherever the case may be. A magnet, I think, is the best, in my mind, description of it, is you can never separate a magnet. You try to split a magnet in half, you still get the two poles on it, no matter where you go, no matter what you do. So we think of these things as polar opposites, being not connected at all, but in reality they are super connected, because it's the difference between them that allows each other to exist. So I'll give a super quick example from things that what I've gone through is I married into an Ohio State family, so I'm not from the area, but they're a big Ohio State family, and of course any rivalry, wherever the case may be, sporting or whatever, they want to beat Michigan's their big rival. So if you ask some fans, you said, what do you want to happen in the big game? They would say, we want Ohio State to win, and win so much, not just beat them, but beat them so badly, like 100-0, 200-0, that Michigan just quits playing football ever again. That's what we want, right? That they just never play football again. Meanwhile, what they don't realize is that would be the end of Ohio State too, because if Michigan ended, then there's really nothing special about Ohio State anymore, and then the recruiting and then the training and stuff like that. Because if you take someone who doesn't know anything about one school or another, they may say, oh, this feels like a great program, lots of great energy at the games. Why is that? Well, is it because they're a really good football team? Well, no, because there's lots of good football teams. Is it because they can have a big fan base? Well, no, lots of teams can draw a big fan base. What really is every aspect of their being is set up for beating Michigan. So that's their entire target there. That's how they run every aspect of what they do. And so if you ever took that away, then it would totally crumble and there would be almost like no purpose. It would be like someone who doesn't have a purpose in life. You kind of wouldn't be successful or motivated or be able to put in the work or the effort needed to be super successful because you don't have that purpose or that target or that goal. You hear the same thing in other industries, whether it's Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, or talk about other actors and stuff like that, saying they had friendly rivalries with people who kept motivating them to kind of move forward. So whereas in one scenario we think of these as our arch enemy or our rival or our nemesis, but actually they become very important because they actually become the key to help you develop or help you move forward or help you kind of grow as a person. And if they weren't there, almost being that antagonist in any kind of book or story that you may read, then there wouldn't be that kind of challenging of yourself or that developing of yourself or the idea of that. Similarly, in the scientific world, we always think of Albert Einstein as this true genius who just had all these amazing ideas, and his ideas were perfect from the beginning. We actually find out is he had Niels Bohr, who kind of worked through some of the ideas of the molecule and the atom and things we know about that. But Einstein would send him things that he would write, and Bohr would actually send him stuff back saying, well, it's interesting what you're thinking, but what about this? How do you handle that? He would challenge all of his assumptions, and it would help Einstein formalize his ideas and make him a better person or better scientist and better ideas because of that, because his ideas have been put to the test or put to the challenge, not necessarily by a rival, but by a competitor or someone who's given them some feedback and challenge them that way. So that's what this initial video kind of talks about is, things we see as polar opposites are actually connected and connected in other ways. And then that eventually kind of gets into ideas of karma, where you get into this idea of self and other, where you see, okay, we have the self and we have other people. And if you treat it that way, even though they're connected, like that's not really, most people would say is, oh, there are ways that I would want to be treated, that if you treat other people in the way you want to be treated, then of course that comes back to you and other people who treat you that way, and that kind of creates this positive karmic cycle. Whereas if you try to treat people as others and say, well, I know I deserve this or I want this for my life and I would never accept this type of stuff for my family, but for those others, that other people, that other group, it's okay to treat them that way, or it's okay to do that kind of stuff. You see it in many cultures with kind of anything. I'm not going to get too political. Anything that gets into like discrimination or anything like that, or oppression. That you in order to do that, you have to treat someone as an other who should have less than you, and it's okay to have less than you, even though you would never accept it for yourself. So that's kind of where it gets into that thing where that's where you're trying to break it, and you say, I'm going to break it, and the others can have this life and deserve these things, whereas myself, I deserve way more, right? And that ends up not being true from a karma standpoint, because if you treat those people in that way, and that a way you would never want yourself to be treated, karma is going to come back at you, and you're going to be treated that way as well too. So that's kind of how that kind of gets through that way in karma. So then the next video kind of talks about a similar kind of topic, which is it's actually Alan Watts talking through a musician. This is Introduction or Nothingness by Alan Watts. Again, talking about this duality. So if there is going to be life, then that means there's naturally going to be death. If there's going to be beginnings, there naturally have to be endings. Like these things always come in pairs, and you can't disconnect them from each other. Fun fact is actually that Hayden Callan is one of my favorite musicians from Australia. I found him just by random. Actually, I'll go through this probably in greater detail in next month's talk about spontaneity of nature and how you can kind of go with the flow of things and how you can get what we call synchronicity and try to really like flow with the energy of the universe and the direction that it's going. And so in this video, the idea of Hayden Callan having a speech by Alan Watts on top of it, you get to this idea of, they're always going to come together, and you end up, not being able to maximize either way out, because they always have it with you. And we'll actually go through this, and probably that'll be like the underlying kind of current as we go into Yugen, which is one of the last talks of it, which is how do you embrace the valley aspect, or I wouldn't say the dark side, or the disappointment side of life, so that you can, that's where you kind of grow. There's a speech by Jordan Peterson. I don't know if I put it in here, I put out if it's in another month, where he kind of talks about this kind of thing, which is growth. I think I do it in the Yugen section, so we'll wait for that. But it's kind of talking about, like, if you are going to a party where you're going to see some of your friends in your social circle, and you want to tell them a joke, in your mind you think, oh, I've got this really funny joke, I'm going to save it for the party, I'm going to tell it to my friends, everyone's going to laugh and have a good time, and we're all going to feel more bonded or connected to each other, right? That's your model for the world. But he says, and if it goes that way, that's great, but you don't learn anything. So in this kind of, duality aspect, in that positive end, that's great. You don't necessarily learn anything other than you're funny and your friends like you and that kind of stuff. But if you tell that joke to your friends and it goes horrible, where it either falls flat, or worse off, you offend somebody, then your whole kind of construct of the world is kind of put a challenge, saying maybe you don't know what they like for humor. Maybe you're not that funny, or maybe they don't even like you as much as you think. So now you get into this kind of valley aspect, where it's like, oh, your whole model for your social structure has been challenged by a failed joke. And so now you have to kind of say, okay, what did I do wrong? That's where wisdom kind of comes from. Both aspects at the same time, in order to have this kind of wisdom or understanding that can come to you by having both aspects at the same time, this duality, this polarity aspect. So I hope that makes sense. If there are any questions on that, ask me, put some questions in there, and I can answer them. The next one by Alan Watts is kind of talking about how it's just a show, or the cosmic actor. Kind of gets into this, how those opposites or those sides can feed each other, where if one idea of the world, which will come back in a different context, is if it was actually to, if we would say whatever you choose to believe, the universe, whatever spirituality you believe in, that fundamental essence is within all of us, and we just don't know it. We just don't feel it. I think we're going to cover this in February. So that's why some people feel alone, isolated, and depressed, because they feel disconnected to that fundamental force in the entire universe that ties us all together and gives us our greatest. So most, lots of derivations of any kind of religion is like that, that breath of life or whatever is within you. You have the access to tap into it, more mindfulness, meditation state, you can attach to the center of the universe, get centered, get to the karmic wisdom, whatever it is that you choose to believe in, by tapping into this. But what this is kind of saying is that's where things can kind of feed off of each other and get almost this kind of karmic flow. He then talks about it through the idea of, if you go to a play, and if you see a play, actually I've studied this scientifically, where they say they measure how good an actor is based on how much your mirror neurons, so you have these mirror neurons in your brain which actually fire. So if there's a scary thing going on, how it makes your brain scared, right? So it's almost how much do you mirror the motions or what you see on the movie or the TV. And what they found through studies is actually, in autistic people, that's part of the wiring for that social interaction that doesn't work as well. So you can show two people the exact same thing, and the mirror neurons will fire a lot more intensely for most people, because if it's a scary scene or they see someone in pain, then you might feel some pain. Have you ever seen this? Like, I know this always affected me. Like, if you see something embarrassing happen to someone really close to you, then you feel embarrassed, but just because you were there and you're almost empathizing with the person in the room. Especially if you have a lot of water sign in your charts and stuff like that. So you're empathizing with them, you're absorbing that energy. And then they found with autistic people that actually that wiring is part of the main part that doesn't work as effectively, and that's why social interaction can be difficult, because you're not feeling that energy from the people, so you're not picking up on the social cues, so lots of social interaction can be difficult. And so what they've actually done similar studies with famous actors. I believe Tom Hanks is one who ranks very high on this. Is they've studied people's brains, fMRIs, while watching specific actors. And you've seen some movies, especially love stories, we see it all the time, where it's like, it was an okay, I like the story, I just didn't feel any chemistry between the two people, right? That's probably one of the most important things, because if you don't feel the chemistry between the actor and the actress, and say, feel the love story, then you're definitely not going to be emotionally vested in whether or not they end up together at the end of the movie, right? But if they do a good job of making you believe that they are in love with each other, or feeling very sad when they're apart, or whatever obstacle comes in that makes any kind of movie a good movie, then you're going to be very emotionally invested in it and say, oh, I really want them to stay together. And you're going to, at the end, you're going to be like, I really enjoyed that movie because I felt like I was on the roller coaster ride with them, and I really wanted them to get back together, and hopefully at the end, if it is a happy ending, then that's great. Actually, my wife is reading lots of books from the author Jojo Moyes, and what she says she loves the most about her writing is there's almost always a happy ending. Like, she kind of wraps stuff up in a way that makes you feel good at the end of the book, so then you want to go read another book, because then you're going to feel good at the end of the book in the same way. So that's kind of what this next video from Alan Watts is talking about, where if you eventually have this idea where we all kind of play these games, or whatever the case may be, whatever it is we want out of life, and then we kind of convince ourselves that it is super important, or very important, kind of the game of what we're doing. Just like if you go to a play, if the actor in the play is really good and he or she makes you believe what they're doing, then your mirror neurons are going to fire, and then you're going to be so emotionally invested, you're going to be feeling happy, sad, crying, angry, whatever the case may be, for those people in the movie. And then at the end of the play, you're going to feel, okay, that was great at the end of the play. And he also says the other part of it is also true too. So they always say, if actors or comedians or people who work with audiences, they need that emotional feedback. So if comedians say it all the time, it's like, oh, I felt like that was a really dead audience. So it's hard for them to be as funny as they want to be, because they're not getting the feedback from the audience. So in the same way, if you have this great actor who is doing such a great job, your mirror neurons are firing, and you're feeling what they're feeling, and you're so emotionally involved in it that you feel like you've lost yourself and your normal life, and now you're wrapped up into this play story. But at the same time, if you're a really good audience with that, then you're going to cheer at the times you should be cheering. You're going to be crying at the times you should be crying. You should be booing at the villain, or whatever the case may be, what it is. You will be sending out the best. So if you have the best actor that makes you feel like it's real, and then as an audience, if it feels real, you're going to act like it's real. And if you act like it's real, you're going to give the feedback back to the actor, and that's going to make him feel even better. And then he's going to, kind of like a comedian, either be funnier or be more emotional. So that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, where it says, we all know that going to a play or watching a movie is for fun or for pretend. But if you really follow it out to its furthest degree on its polarity, if the best actor convinces you it's real and the best audience behaves like it's real, how is it any different than real life? That's kind of what he's posing in this video for you to think about and kind of get exposed to, that idea of, that duality, that polarity, almost how you get the karmic energy flowing back and forth. Very important and in every single aspect. And he kind of tells it through the lens of a play, right? So if you have any questions on that one, let me know. So then, this is another one of my favorite ones. The next one we have is the story of the Chinese farmer. So then the story of the Chinese farmer, what it talks about is this next thing. So far I've been using, I'll say, earthly constructs of this, which if you want to go super deep in mindfulness, we can get away from a little bit, but those would be one step towards it. I'm talking about, it's like everything, this duality brings in and for our first base case, positive and negative associations, right? Okay, we all know that's positive and negative associations. That's going to be great. And in my mind, like, one of the first ways you can treat it is, and what Alan Watts wants to challenge is, what we really think may be positive may actually be negative if you look at it from a greater perspective. So for the day, you may think something's really positive or really negative. But if you have a year back to look back on it, you may change your opinion of it, right? So that's why saying things are either positive or negative is kind of like a tough construct to use, because it's just certain energies. And that's why in this video, anytime something positive or negative happens, they say, oh, isn't that great? And he says, maybe, almost because, yes, it may seem great in the short term, but if we get a little longer perspective, we may look back and not be great. best real life example I can give you from that is, the 10 years ago or so, I was going through a divorce, and in the moment, yeah, I would have said, "Oh, this is definitely what I don't want to happen. This is such a negative thing, such a negative thing. This is the worst thing that's happened to me in my life to this date." Now, if you in the moment you could fast forward to me 10 years from now, and I have two beautiful, healthy kids. That's why I was hoping to do these videos somewhere nice and outside or whatever, but before you get whatever, just putting them to bed, whatever, I can do these. But if you're able to show me my children the love I have for my children, and the only way for them to exist is for that divorce to have happened, and for me to meet my wife now and have these kids, like genetically, DNA wise, that the only way for these two beautiful souls to exist in real life. And so what may have seemed like a very negative thing that happened 10 years ago, and I would have for years would have said this is a really bad thing, now from a greater lens of time, 10 years, I can say that's a really great thing that happened, because that is the only path that would have gotten to me to these children that I absolutely love, and it's the only way that they ever would have come into fruition in the universe. So in this video, that's kind of the idea that he's proposing, which is what we may think of as positive or negative. That kind of wraps up the video with, we never know the consequences of something you think positive in the short term. In the long term, it may be catastrophic consequences. Or something you may think may be really negative for you in the short term may actually be really positive. You see, people talking about this sometimes, like, okay, let's say you go into work tomorrow and you get fired. Today, this month, that's something super, super negative. But if it helps move you and help you find your dream job, or help you move for that job to your dream city and meet your dream people, whatever the case may be, that's what you can see. So in the moment, these are super negative things, but the consequences of that quote unquote negative thing happen to you may be super positive over time, that we need to kind of look at things through a greater lens, and maybe in a longer period of lens, before we truly assign whether it's positive or negative, if that makes sense. And we'll definitely go through that later in the later months as we get into kind of towards the secret of life and all that kind of stuff. So then I think in that last video, kind of the speech on how like you are it and how everything kind of feeds through you. I don't want to go too a little bit long on it, but I think the main kind of summary of all these things is, again, going back to the analogy of a magnet, life comes at you in both ways at the same time. We can interpret it as positive, we can look at it as potentially negative. Through a longer lens, we may change which one's positive and which one's negative over time based on more perspective or more views of how it moved us or didn't move us in our life. But that's kind of the idea. And I would say the same example of using my children, I would say, everyone says, oh, like being a dad and having kids is one of the best things in the world that's happened to me, and I just love them so much and enjoy them. And I can just go upstairs and just watch them sleep, and that brings me so much joy. At the same time, everyone says, "Oh, but what about all the things? It's everything else is true. Yeah, you're not gonna, go out as much. You're not gonna see your friends. You're not gonna sleep. Like all those things are true, and you have no idea how much it's gonna be worth it because you're gonna enjoy it." For me, at the same time, I would say my wife and I both had conversations about these. Is having kids is so wonderful, but it really is the idea. Almost feels like that's how your heart kind of leaves your body and now lives in these two other beings, and you have like no control over what happens to them. And so it brings out a lot of anxiety. And for each of us, it came out in different ways, where the positiveness of all this love and unconditional love for your children, but then you have this own kind of anxiety that comes out, like you want to protect them completely. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to expose them to the world so they're raised, so they grow up to be like full independent human beings, but at the same time I want to protect them in a bubble and never let them get hurt in any way, shape, or form, right? And you can't do both at the same time. For me, my own anxieties were things like, okay, are they, like physical security things? Like I always thought of like, I was the baby proof guy going around saying like, what if, 5 things happen and this topples over, they grab this and this at the same time and this happens, or I would be the one using my phone as a flashlight in the middle of the night, getting up, just making sure everybody's, breathing and all that kind of stuff. My own anxieties that I have that kind of come out because of this. So having children has been wonderful because I have all this unconditional love, but at the same time it did almost bubble out whatever anxiety I may have had, or I've heightened it. And I really kind of thought through in my own life, I'm like, I never felt like I was an anxious person. I would never say I was like an anxious person, or I had, kind of dealing with anxiety. My wife had kind of previously self-identified that in her family, anxiety is a thing and kind of runs through it. But then through that lens of that conversation, I actually realized there were clear signs of anxiety all through my life. My mom, when we would leave the house, she would go and physically tap the stove to make sure it was off. And that was just, we just thought that's what mom does to make sure she didn't leave the stove on. But in her mind, it was like, oh, I don't want to start a fire while we're gone after cooking. So I will go and physically touch all the stoves to make sure they're not still on and hot, right? In the same way, I didn't probably didn't internalize that anxiety at the time. Same way when I started living on my own for the first time, I thought of it as I'm sleepy, I'm tired, and I'm going to work. But I can't tell you the number of times I'd be like, "Did I lock the door? Did I lock the door?" And it would nag on me so much. I can't tell you how many times I would turn around, go home just to check my front door, because it's like, "Oh, did I really do it?" Because in my mind, it's like, "Oh, I'll waste 5 minutes turning around." But the consequences of me leaving my house unlocked and having all my stuff gone, stolen, or whatever the case may be would be huge. So I'm just going to turn around. When really that's kind of like an anxiety kind of response or mechanism. And so in thinking about those things and now seeing it with my kids, it's like, oh, I never realized that, I really have had anxiety as part of my life all along. Whether I was coping with it or getting by with it, I never thought it was a big deal. And now having these kids, I'm recognizing more, because as the kids kind of amplify your love, it also is amplifying the anxiety that I had naturally in my life, or naturally maybe I inherited from my mom. And so it's gotten me thinking about those kinds of things as well too. So that's why there's always this kind of polarity and duality that comes with everything, and we just have to either embrace it and understand that this is the natural way of things. And we'll talk about another future lecture of how that's super important. So I'll just finish with, so I know we've got some new people. Maybe I should put this in the beginning, but one of the reasons why I wanted to start this group, and I really appreciate everyone who's joining, is because I think I'll turn 43 next month, and really when I got around the age of 40, I really said, man, if I'm at 40, I should probably have something of value that I could give to other people. I should have learned something of value at some point that I could pass on to other people, or pass on to like things that I would have appreciated knowing when I was in my 20s, whatever the case may be. But there should be some, we all kind of specialize in our own things and do our own things, but there should be something that I've spent a lot of time with that I learned something enough that I would kind of help people in that area. And for me, it was, since this is the biggest struggle in my life, is like mindfulness. What is our purpose? How do we reduce regrets when we get to life? How do we connect with our true authentic selves and live in our purpose? That's been such a struggle for me. I would say at least the last 10 years, that's why that I kind of focus on that. And the other part of it, as I said, being in my scientist background, is whether right or wrong, I should have a working model of what the secret of life is at the end, and what we should be working on and doing that. And that's why a lot of these lessons kind of build up towards the end, which is like my perspective, what is the secret of life? And then when you learn that, you'll see that that's not the end. Most people think that's really the beginning of how you kind of go and do the work to figure out how you can achieve gaining alignment and connecting with your purpose. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, let me know. Please feel reach out or comment. I'll kind of check in with people, because I think last month everyone can kind of see areas where they may need to let go. That can be a little bit obvious, where like I definitely overreact, to negative comments on Facebook, or haters in my life, or people who are critical in my life. We can all probably see areas of that. This one's a little bit trickier because it's a little bit more esoteric on, just need to accept that there's now I'll go back to positivity and negativity, but there's a duality to everything. But if you really get into like the stuff underneath and how it connects to karma and how everything works that way, or self-fulfilling feedback systems, you can see how it becomes a true like energy source for things that may happen going forward. So I hope this is helpful. I would appreciate anyone's feedback if this is helping you, or if there's other things that may be confusing. I can try to find some other videos which may kind of clarify some specific things as well too. But I hope you're enjoying this, and we'll get ready for November here right around the corner and keep going. Great, thanks.